Hi, welcome back to another episode of You Can Do It with Chris and Annie. I'm standing next to an armoire that I finished just a few months back. It was just a regular plain stained wood armoire, and I added this technique to it, gave it a farmhouse, shabby chic, really cool rustic look. And I am going to show you today how you can do it to any piece of furniture or art project that you're wanting to give it that French country farmhouse shabby chic look to as well. Stay tuned. All right, as you can see, there are not too many parts required in order to do a shabby chic farmhouse look on any piece of furniture. The things I have here: water and stain for the first part. I've got a paintbrush and some leftover household paint. It really doesn't matter if it's oil-based or water-based. Water-based is always easier to use, but it does not matter what kind of paint you're going to be using. You're gonna need that sander for that really nice sanded appearance, and then a finishing wax. This has a pigment to it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then of course your safety glasses for when you're sanding. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're going to mist that wood. If you guys watched that last video about how to stain wood, I mentioned on there that you're gonna wanna just do a light mist to whatever wood project you're using, and wait about 15 minutes so that that wood, the pores on the wood open up to accept this grain. In this kind of project, it really isn't that big of a deal. But when I do go to sanding it, if all I did was put the stain on, I've just got stain right on the very surface. So when I go to sand that white paint off to get that, aged look, I would pull a lot of that stain off. So by opening up these pores and then applying the stain, I allow that stain to sink in a little bit deeper than it would have had I not done this water process. So let that sink in for about 15 minutes, and then you can move to the staining. All right, 15 minutes has passed and we're ready for the stain. The stain color I'm using today is a dark walnut. That armoire that I did, I used a special walnut, a little bit lighter in color. So I'm going with a little bit more of a contrast with this corbel here. So I use a rag. You can use a paintbrush. If you do, you're gonna need two of these throwaways then, one for the stain and one for the paint. But I like the rag. Always go in the direction of the grain, never against it. You'll get a more even appearance if you stay with the direction of the grain. And in this case, this corbel, I did sand it all the way down to a 120 like I had mentioned in that one video. I stopped at a 120 on this one because it's not a piece of furniture. It's more like a decoration. So I did not need to finish off with that 220. But I also put some wood filler in certain parts where there were some cracks in here, and it is a stainable wood filler like I had mentioned also in that video. If you are doing a project where you're going to be staining it and you'll be seeing where you had put that wood filler in, make sure that you use a stainable wood filler, or your wood filler will stick out like a sore thumb. It will not accept the stain and it will not look good. Okay, so again, just make sure you go all the way around your project, keeping with the grain of the wood. Okay, I finished staining. I let this corbel sit for approximately 25 minutes for that stain to really soak into it. And then what I'm gonna do is I am going to just run another rag, different rag, over this just to pick up any excess stain that may not have soaked into the wood. So you're just gonna wanna run a rag. You don't have to, really be crazy about it. Just run a rag over it. Get any of that excess wood stain that didn't adhere or soak in. And also this is cleaning off any dust that might be on this corbel. Now for the next step, which will be the paint, you're gonna want this wood, whatever the project is, you're gonna want that to sit for at least 6 hours to really dry so that you're not pulling that stain and it's mixing in with whatever the paint is that you're putting over that. So again, do this in the morning, come back in the late afternoon and start doing your painting, or do it right in the evening and then the next morning come back and do that paint. All right, well, usually when there's one corbel, there's two. So this one I had done last night, just so it was nice and dry and ready to accept the paint. The paint I'm using is an interior paint. It really doesn't matter if it's interior or exterior. You're just going for a look. So, and again, it doesn't matter if it's oil-based or water-based. I like using the water-based latex paint. It's a whole lot easier to clean up. So when you do this, normally I'd be on the ground and dipping into this, but for this I'm gonna go ahead and do it from here. So it might be a little bit awkward, but you're just gonna go ahead and dip that paintbrush in, and then again, just kind of go with the grain. Looks like I'm, wasted my time staining that wood because of course now I'm covering it up, but you'll see that stain come back through on the next step. So you are just going to, again, go with the grain, try to keep some nice long strokes once you do get that paint on there, just so it's not all broken up and you have a whole bunch of paint marks. However, with this shabby chic look we are going for, it's not gonna be a perfect look. So it's okay if you do have some strokes here and there, and the sanding's gonna kind of take care of that as well. And then the coat of a darkened wax that you do, that will also cover it up. And of course, I'm wearing a glove on the hand that I am not painting with. That's super smart. But you will notice too with these throwaway brushes, they're great because they are cheap and you can throw them away, but they are cheap, and you will get parts of the paintbrush in your project. So you'll have to just kind of go through it, kind of like dog and cat hair, and pick it out as you go along. So a single coat on this kind of paint, latex, dries pretty quick unless it's, humid or cold outside. But I'd say in about 45 minutes to an hour, you will be able to come back and start actually working on your project. So I'll continue putting that one single coat of paint on this. All right, the paint has had a chance to dry. It's been about 2 hours. I only put one coat on this. You can put two if you want, but the whole purpose of this project is to kind of show that farmhouse shabby chic look. So there's nothing perfect about that finished look. It's meant to look old and been through some age. So I only did one coat. This is the sanding portion, and it might be a little scary at first because you don't know where to start on this, and you certainly don't want to mess it up. So if you are concerned about something like that, I suggest maybe for your first project, go pick something up at the thrift store that you don't even care about, and if it works out well for you, then it might be something you want to keep. But there's no love lost. If you destroy it, then throw it back at the thrift store. So in something like this, or in any piece of furniture, the obvious wear is going to be on edges and top surfaces. So that's kind of what you want to sand off, and then do a little bit of sporadic sanding here and there, but focus on the edges and surfaces that would normally be worn. So we'll go ahead and get that started. This is 120 grit sandpaper. Your purpose is to just scuff up the paint, not get way down back to the wood. All right, so here we go. All right, you would just kind of give it a once through, see if that's, if that is about the aged look you're going for. Obviously it's simple. It's not there's not a real technique to it. You just kind of want to wear off those edges, do a little bit of surface sanding here, wear off some of those edges there. I mean, you really can't mess this up. It's, just an aged look. So the next step is, of course, going to be aging it just a little bit more. I'm going to show you two different techniques I do for aging that you may or may not want to do to finish this project up. So I mentioned that I was going to show you 2 techniques to finish it off, but there's something that I like to do with a lot of my wood projects to give it that even more authentic aged look, and that's wormholes. I've done that on cabinets, I've done that on tables, I've done that on all sorts of stuff, and it just really gives that look like I'm pulling something out of history, even though I'm faking it. So I have this punch, and you can use a nail, a 16-penny nail, something that has a really nice tip to it to do the wormholes as well. And again, this isn't something you have to do to add to these projects, but it does give that little extra step that makes it look authentic and pretty cool. So obviously wormholes, they're going to be clustered. You're not gonna, kind of honeycomb this thing with wormholes. You're just going to have a few here, a few there around the item that you're doing. So I'll show you how I do it. I like to put them at an angle when I'm punching because worms usually don't come straight out of wood. They'll burrow in at an angle. So I'll give a little punch here and there. You don't have to go deep. It really depends what kind of wood you're doing this with. This is pine, so of course pine is going to be a really soft wood, so you're not gonna wanna, really hammer down when you're doing that. And again, this is not, some fancy project you're doing, so it's okay if you mess up. Don't cluster it. Make sure you spread those wormholes around. Worms aren't going to architecturally design their holes. They are just going to dig and burrow wherever they want. Now I'm doing this now after I sanded because when I go back with my stain, I need to be able to fill those holes in with the stain so it really looks authentic. If I did this before I sanded, I would not even see these. The sandpaper, or I'm sorry, the sawdust from sanding would end up filling up these little tiny holes, and I just wasted my time. So I don't know if you can see this, but there are these little wormhole fake around this corbel here. And when I stain it, those will appear even more because the stain will sink in. So it gives just that extra little authenticity to the project you're doing. For that final step, I mentioned there's 2 techniques that you could possibly use to finish this project off. Obviously, if you wanted to just end at where we're at right now, that's fine. But there are some areas where there is a little bit of raw wood showing through. So if you want to just completely make that wood project, whatever it is, that armoire that I did before, a table, a chair, whatever you're doing this technique to, it can finish here, or we can go just one more step further. So there are 2 techniques. I have 2 completely different corbels because they did come from a set. So I'm gonna show you what I can do with one set and what I can do with another set. And then I'll show you closer up once I'm all finished, what those final sets look like. So you can kind of see what 2 different techniques and what their end result is. Our first one is the antique wax. This is a dark brown antique wax. It seals up that wood. It does give a matte to a satin finish in that end product. Or I've done this plenty of times as well. I just go back over the entire project with the original stain that I used, and then it also seals it. It does give it more of a satin to a semi-gloss look when it's finished. The only thing I would say about doing something like this is that when the project is done, you do not want to touch it for a few days because this is going over an already sealed project for the most part. This stain actually needs a few days to dry. It will not soak in like it did on that first step. So that's really the only extra added thing you're doing with something like that. So we'll start here with the wax. You're just gonna gop it up, doesn't matter. I love this part of the project. You could just be a total mess and just get that stain all over. Make sure that you dig it into all those areas, especially those cool wormholes that you just created, so that those will show up in the end. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and do this staining part. And this, again, just like you did it originally, just kind of put that stain on. In this case, it does not need to go with the grain, even though I'm kind of working it that way. It does not have to go with the grain because this isn't really soaking into wood. It's just kind of topping off that top coat. Definitely make sure you squeeze that into all those little wormholes that you created so that they do show up. Okay, now that was definitely sped up for you. But if you noticed, when I stained this with that final coat of that original stain that I put on there, which in this case, I used dark walnut, right after I stained it, I went right back over it with the rag. This is not something that you just let sit there, okay? So stain it, go right back over it with the rag. I switched out my rag so that I can clean it off. Unlike this one, when you use the dark, let's see, what is it? Dark brown, but it's antique wax. You let that sit for about 15 minutes so that it does have a chance to kind of soak into areas, and then take a new clean rag and then wax off what any excess that you see here. So for the final thing, I will finish up the twin corbels, and then I'll show you a really close view of what this looks like, so you can kind of see dark wax finish, or right back over with that original stain that you used, and just the different looks that you can get with either or. All right, as promised, I am showing you the finished result. These first two are the ones that I did with the stain, where I just went right back over the project with the original stain that I used, which in this case was the dark walnut. I'm showing the closer view so that you can see those wormholes that I'm talking about. Just kind of gives it a little bit more authentic history behind that, so you can see them. Obviously in the camera it doesn't show up nearly as well as it would if you saw it in person. But again, we started with just raw pine. Of course, Chris made these corbels, and then now I finished them off, and they look like something out of an old farmhouse. The last two right here, a little bit larger corbels, these were finished off with that antique wax that I was showing you. And again, little wormholes here and there, give it that final authentic finished product. So you saw all the steps, and I believe that on your next wood project, when you go to get that farmhouse, shabby chic French country type look, that by following these simple steps, you can do it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, hit that bell, and share our videos. Have a great day.